For the longest time, South Korea has been the country that's most at risk of absolute population collapse. From 1950 to 2023, they went from having the highest birth rates in the world to the lowest, being the only country on Earth with a birth rate below 1. But now things are changing. For the first time in almost a decade, South Korea has had a baby bump, a rise in the amount of children born compared to the year before, from a birth rate of 0.72 in 2023 to 0.75 in 2024. It's a massive success, to say the least, given we've seen basically every developed country on Earth enact policies to fight this fertility crisis to no success. And the craziest part is, this was done without needing massive amounts of immigration either. So what has South Korea, the country most at risk of collapsing, done to start reversing this catastrophe? Well, to understand it all, it would help to go back to the mid-50s, when South Korea underwent a population boom. The hostilities of the Korean War had finally ended, and the country began the process of rebuilding. While this period in South Korea's history was far from stable in terms of the governing regimes and economic development, the armistice with North Korea allowed many civilians to turn their focus to creating families. Refugees also flooded back from the north, and repatriated citizens returned home. A population boom was inevitable. In just a decade, their population increased by 25%, or an additional 5 million people. On paper, it seemed like a recovering nation rebuilding itself, but for the government, it was quickly becoming an existential crisis. See, South Korea was still devastated by the war. Food was hard to come by, jobs were in short supply. Its per capita GDP was just $94, lower than that of Haiti, Ethiopia, Yemen, and 40% lower than India. The country was also receiving massive amounts of foreign aid just to stay afloat, and the idea of supporting millions more mouths to feed was problematic, to say the least. The government knew it had to do something, so by the late 1950s, officials increased efforts to reduce population growth. They pushed the narrative that smaller families meant a stronger nation, linking family size to economic survival. In 1962, South Korea launched its first 5-year family planning program, one of the most ambitious in the developing world, aimed to reduce the fertility rate and achieve economic growth by promoting smaller families through information, services, and social support policies. Slogans promoting having 2 or even just 1 child plastered the walls and filled radio broadcasts. This one here from 1974 says, "Sons or daughters, let's have 2 children and raise them well." And this one from the 1980s encourages just 1 child, saying, "Even 2 children per family are too many for our crowded country." What's more, all kinds of benefits came along with having fewer kids. Couples with 2 or fewer children were exempted from paying income tax. Men and women who were sterilized were given preferential treatment for things like housing loans and public housing allotments. The government's campaign worked, perhaps too well. By the mid-1970s, South Korea had slashed its fertility rate, or the number of children per woman, from over 6 children per woman to just under 4. By the 1980s, South Korea's fertility rate was below 2 children per woman, and as you might have guessed, it never recovered. At the same time though, its economy was unrecognizable. Its GDP had skyrocketed, and it had become one of the world's leading exporters of electronics, automobiles, and steel, thanks to the growth of companies like Samsung and Hyundai. By 1995, it had established itself as the 11th largest economy in the world. In just over 2 decades, the country went from fearing overpopulation to enforcing policies that would eventually create a whole new crisis, one much more dangerous than the other. See, it was within this economic transformation that the fertility rate continued to plummet, to the point where by 2023, South Korea had a record low fertility rate of just 0.72, the lowest ever recorded in any country's history. When that report came out, it was expected that South Korea's fertility rate would only keep dropping, causing panic among government officials. In the wake of these reports, President Yoon Suk-yeol declared a demographic national emergency and asked the parliament to establish the Ministry of Low Birth Rate Counter-Planning. But what do these birth rate numbers actually mean? Well, simply put, every population needs to maintain a fertility rate of 2.1 or higher in order to grow in the long run. At this rate, a woman gives birth to enough children to replace herself and her partner, accounting for the levels of child mortality in society. But when you're under this number, especially for a long time, it eventually becomes catastrophic. If a generation isn't producing enough babies, it won't be able to replace itself. Combine this with a reduction in the number of young people coming through, the population will also quickly begin to age, causing the ratio of people too young or too old to work compared to those of working age to skyrocket in the following decades. In South Korea's case, by 2050, it's expected that 40% of the country's population will be over the age of 65, possibly making it the oldest country in the world. On top of this, South Korea already has the third longest life expectancy across the globe, with people living nearly 84 years on average. This means that more people will be retired and collecting the state pension plan, and there will be far fewer working adults helping to pay for it. Basically, the country's spending will have to increase, while tax revenues will have to go down from the lack of workers. It's expected that the state pension plan will be depleted by 2055, meaning that in a few decades, retirees in South Korea may have no safety net to help them survive. Now, you can see why that's catastrophic. And to take it a step further, it's predicted that the population would halve by the end of the century if it keeps going down this road. The issue is actually the same thing that political leaders all over the world are facing, especially those in Western countries. It took until 2005, 30 years after they abolished their anti-fertility policies, and when South Korea's fertility rate hit a historic global low of 1.08, that they finally decided to start trying to address this crisis. So, what are the reasons behind it all? Well, it's two parts: work culture and economics. Culturally, South Korea is extremely competitive. Status is valued above all else. And the way to get that status is by studying 24/7, then working 24/7, and sacrificing everything to get to the top. Naturally, this doesn't make for a good quality of life. According to 2023 data from the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, a group of mostly developed countries, workers in South Korea spent an average of 100 more hours working per year than the average developed country, or an additional 2 hours per week. Assuming a 40-hour work week, that's nearly 2 weeks more of work per year than the average American. Many workers are expected to attend mandatory after-work dinners, stay late at the office until the boss leaves, or work on weekends, for example. Many young professionals also feel that they must work extra hours or devote what little free time they have to studying to improve at their job and get ahead. The workforce is competitive, meaning that less dedication to a career comes with job instability. Not only does this mean that Korean people have less time to spend at home and taking care of kids, but for younger people it also means less time socializing, dating, and possibly meeting a future spouse. All of this competition obviously led to the nation having a loneliness epidemic, where people have become emotionally hardened and less likely to form relationships. Now, marriage rates are down 40% when looking at 2013 versus 2023, as more South Koreans are increasingly prioritizing work over starting a family. Speaking of loneliness, this is something I've gone through quite a bit in my life, especially when making the move from South Africa to the US a few years ago. Knowing no one, starting fresh, one of the best things I did was to get help through therapy. And that's where I'd like to introduce the sponsor of this video, BetterHelp. Their entire mission is centered around making starting therapy easier. All you have to do is fill out a questionnaire and you'll be matched with a fitting therapist in days. If they're not the right one, you can switch therapists at any time completely free. This is as good as it gets, and with over 7,000 reviews and a 4.3 rating on Trustpilot, BetterHelp is a platform you can trust. So click the link in the description or go to betterhelp.com/VerstYT and get 10% off your first month of therapy. But let's put this to the side for a bit and talk about the South Koreans who got past this hurdle, who are in relationships now. There's still more cultural issues. The women, having been raised in this culture of hyper-competitiveness, are rightfully worried that having a child will stunt their career trajectory permanently. The message is that marriage and children are a liability if you want to overcome these odds. But there's also a different cultural side of this, one of antiquated gender roles. As the country modernized, women gained access to higher education and careers, but domestic expectations remained unchanged. Women in South Korea are often still expected to be homemakers, doing most of the household chores and child raising in addition to working a full-time job. South Korea also has the worst gender pay gap of any developed country, with women earning over 30% less than men. If they were to quit their job, it makes them economically vulnerable. If they get divorced or separated, they and their children may suffer. They know this in advance and, as a result, don't want children. These cultural expectations persist on the other side of the equation too. 67% of men say they've experienced gender discrimination when it comes to childcare. For a new father who wants to help raise his child, it's not uncommon to hear things like, "What's the point of paternity leave for men?" and having it be used against them. Then there's the economic reasons, which are of course intertwined. It's getting more expensive to have a good life in South Korea. This may sound familiar to many of you who live in developed countries, but Korea has been plagued with unaffordable housing, especially in Seoul. High tuition costs, stagnating job opportunities, rising costs for childcare, and falling incomes relative to inflation in the past several years. Unemployment is another major factor. You see, since 2010, South Korea has had the highest elderly poverty rate of any developed country at 45%. The government's solution was the Mandatory Retirement Act, which raised the legal retirement age from 58 to 60, keeping older workers employed for longer. But this move came at a cost. Instead of fixing the problem, it pushed the crisis onto younger workers. With older employees holding onto jobs longer, entry-level positions dried up, leaving South Korea's youth with even fewer opportunities to break into the workforce. In 2023, those aged 25 to 29 accounted for 20.3% of the unemployed, the highest among developed countries. Without steady work, young people are much less inclined to get married and have kids. The result of all this has been a generation of millennials labeled the give up or sampo generation, translated to the 3 give up generation. This refers primarily to millennials and Gen Z in their 20s and 30s, who have abandoned dating, marriage, and childbirth due to social and economic pressures. Over time, this phenomenon expanded and compounded when you factor in the actual cost of having kids, culminating in the 10 giving up generation. Giving up, well, everything. One research institute found that South Korea was the most expensive country to raise children in. One of the largest factors in this are hagwons, private after-school institutions designed to give kids an advantage in a competitive educational landscape through intensive tutoring, especially for the notorious university entrance exam, the Sunyoung. For comparison, there's more than 24,000 hagwons located just in Seoul, triple the number of convenience stores in the city. See, because parents have to spend so much time at work and not with their children, and because Korean culture prioritizes educational and economic achievement, parents spend tons of money on private education. 442,000 won per month per elementary school student, 490,000 won per middle school student, and 520,000 won per high school student. For the median South Korean salary of 3.3-ish million won, that means each child's private education cost alone is coming out to more than 10% of their income. All of the issues with South Korea's work culture extend to the school culture for children. Long hours and little free time, all at a financial cost to the parents, a cost that's still increasing. Since 2020, total spending on private education has increased every year, reaching an all-time high of 29 trillion won. Despite the total student population dropping from 5.21 million in 2023 to 5.13 million in 2024. The percentage of students that attend hagwon is around 78% in 2024 too, so don't get it twisted, this isn't something that's just for the wealthy. Most students in South Korea simply can't live like kids. When you factor in the heightened sense of comparison fueled by social media, many South Koreans can't help but wonder if they can afford to raise their children with these opportunities. And if not, think they just shouldn't have any at all. As we can see, there's a lot within South Korea that needs to be changed in order to improve the birth rates. And like I said before, they only started enacting these changes from 2005. Yet, it's been mostly a failure until now, and even 2024 may end up being seen as a fluke. So what's changed from now to then? Well, in the beginning, they established the Framework Act on Low Birth Rate in an Aging Society that year, requiring a new plan for how the government is going to address the birth rate problem every 5 years, similar to the approach taken by 2 other low fertility countries, Germany and Japan. The first and second iterations of this plan, from 2006 to 2010 and from 2011 to 2015, included policies and measures to support pregnancy and childbirth, as well as childcare services to relieve couples' financial burden of raising children. This came in the form of tax incentives, an increase in childcare facilities, support for education, and assistance to infertile couples. The third basic plan for low fertility and aging society in Korea, as it was called, from 2016 to 2020, focused on providing additional support for job seeking and housing for newlyweds to address the financial factors that contribute to getting married later and staying single longer, such as giving them priority for the purchase of a new apartment, which would be heavily in demand. Finally, they increased subsidies from 130,000 won for parents who have children under 5 years old to 400,000 won, extending the offer to everyone in the country rather than just the lower-income families, and increased paternity leave from 3 days to 10. In this time period of the two iterations, from 2006 to 2016, $70 billion had been spent trying to increase the birth rate, but none of it was working. That may be why the government revised the third round in 2018, announcing the policy roadmap for an inclusive nation. The new plan designed a transition to a policy aimed at improving the quality of life for all generations, based on the criticism that previous plans have simply focused on the government's role in encouraging childbirth without putting people at the center. It had a goal of reaching a 1.5 birth rate by 2020, which, as we know, ended up being 0.84 instead. South Korea implemented their fourth version of the plan in 2021, which just had more incentives. Up until 2023, nothing seemed to be working, despite having now spent over $270 billion since 2006 on programs aimed to increase the birth rate. It just kept getting lower. That's why, starting in 2022, South Korea got a lot more aggressive with its policies and a lot looser with its wallet. Since then, mothers have received a one-time payment of 2 million won, or $1,510 upon the birth of a child, and 3 million won, or $2,030 for each one after. Instead of the mostly program and subsidies-driven path that had defined the previous 15 years, the government started dishing out more and more money directly to new parents. Maybe it was a coincidence, but shortly before that decision, a study came out analyzing the effectiveness of South Korea's natalist programs, and came to a conclusion that over 74% of the $270 billion spent on the program went towards inframarginal births, or children who would have been born anyway, even without the financial incentives. The study also came to the conclusion that the benefit levels would need to be 15 times larger to have any meaningful impact on fertility rates. Someone in the South Korean government seems to have read the report, because in 2024, officials ramped up their family planning incentives. Whereas in 2023, the monthly allowance with babies up to 1 year old was 700,000 won. It became 1 million won in 2024. And from 350,000 won for the second year to 500,000 won. From giving fathers 10 days of fully paid paternity leave in 2024, it's now doubled to 20 in 2025. But the benefits don't stop after the child is an infant. To make the task of raising a kid easier, parents can apply to take a partially paid childcare leave of up to 1.5 years if their child is under 12 years old. At the municipal level, these programs are even more generous. Seoul, South Korea's capital, announced that it will provide housing subsidies to new parents who rent their homes. The city will provide 300,000 won per newborn per month for 2 years if the couple continues living in the city. There's no set income limit for who's eligible, but the family must have a monthly rent of 2.68 million won or less. If the parents decide they want to buy a home, they'll no longer be eligible for the subsidy. They will, however, get priority in a housing subscription system. Essentially, couples can subscribe to win a new home a few years before it's built. They'll still have to pay for the new housing, but the government will provide them with a low-interest loan to help. The city of Gwangyang provides subsidies for medical care, fertility tests, prenatal care, and 1 million won when a woman becomes pregnant. The South Jeolla province, the fastest shrinking province in South Korea, is promising 200,000 won per month per child until they turn 19. The city of Hwaseong is setting aside certain apartments for newly married couples that are twice the average size but only 1/3 of the cost of a standard unit. And this is just to name a few things from each city. All in all, the government set aside $13.8 billion for addressing the birth rate crisis overall in 2025, a 22% increase from 2024, which is monumental. But it's not just the federal governments or the local governments trying to solve this. Even companies are too. Maybe it's a recognition that they'll need more young workers in the decades to come. Maybe it's because they're getting tax incentives and subsidies from the government to do so. Maybe it's out of a sense of patriotism. Or maybe it's a combination of all three. The construction company Buyong Group, for example, is giving parents 100 million won, and will help families with 3 children pay for their housing, while apparel company Songbang Wool Group is offering 30 million won. But this is still only one side of the equation, because no matter how much money you throw at the problem, it doesn't fix the core issue, which is societal. There have been ups and downs in this path. For example, South Koreans work 200 less hours per year than they did in 2013, but they're still working the 6th most hours out of any developed country in the world, at 1,872 per year. It could have been a lot more too, because just in 2023, when you think the government would be valuing trying to fix their birth rate the most, they tried proposing a bill that would have increased the legal work week from 52 to 69 hours. It was a staggering reverse of direction, considering that in 2018, the government capped working hours at 52, 40 plus 12 hours of overtime per week, down from 68 hours per week previously. Massive protests from Gen Z and millennials were the only reason why this didn't go through. For combating the loneliness epidemic, South Korea has had some interesting methods, to say the least. The city of Seoul launched a $322 million initiative called Seoul Without Loneliness. It includes a 24/7 loneliness hotline, community dining spaces, and reward programs for attending social events. The government also offers 700,000 won to socially isolated youths aged 9 to 24 to help them re-enter society. On Valentine's Day in 2025, the metropolitan government organized an event called Romance Art Night, pairing 50 men and 50 women at a venue in the city. The event was complete with dinner, champagne, love-themed bingo, and an exercise where the 100 participants gazed into each other's eyes for 10 seconds. After attracting nearly 2,400 people, the event ended on a high note, as half of the participants said they found a partner. Meanwhile, the Saha-gu district in Busan, Korea's second-largest city, is launching a program where they'll select eligible singles in the district, born between 1981 to 2001, and host a matchmaking event. They're offering 1 million won to couples who start dating as a result. But it doesn't just end there. They'll then pay 2 million won if they meet each other's parents, and 20 million won if they get married. The district council will even support newlyweds with a 30 million won housing deposit, or 800,000 won in monthly rent for up to 5 years. It's pretty top-down, to say the least, and the results of all these policies may be showing now. As I said before, the birth rate went from 0.72 in 2023 to 0.75 in 2024. Or in other words, a total of 238,300 babies were born in 2024, up 3.6% from a record low of just 230,000 in 2023. But despite all this, the reality still remains that throwing money at this problem won't fix it long term, but that it's societal. South Korea's crushing hypercompetitiveness starts in childhood, with the cutthroat education system that eventually leads to cutthroat working cultures. This ultimately needs to be fixed. People need more time outside their jobs if they're to meet other people. And to be frank, if we're to look at the rest of the world, particularly in Europe, countries like France, Italy, and Germany, where they've tried using immigration to boost the birth rate, it hasn't been successful, because immigrants end up assimilating by the 2nd or 3rd generation, and the birth rates become similar to the natives. Meanwhile, countries like Hungary and Japan that have shied away from immigration as a solution and have tons of social programs similar to South Korea have continued to have their birth rates decline. So clearly, South Korea is doing something right, at least for now. Whether this is a one-off spike or if it will be the beginning of consistent growth remains to be seen. It wasn't huge, but growth is growth. Their goal by 2030 is for a modest birth rate of just 1. Because a more gradual population decline, combined with technological advancement and productivity gains, could allow for a soft landing rather than demographic collapse, which may seem to be inevitable in this new technological age. But we'll see how that works. And once again, thank you to BetterHelp for sponsoring this video. Don't forget to click the link in the description and get 10% off your first month of therapy. I'll see you in the next one.